So today we're going to take a look at manipulating anchor points, repositioning them, adding them, and deleting them. A lot of times when we're working in Illustrator to create logos and icons and different types of graphics like that, we're starting off using very simple shapes and manipulating them or adding to them to create more complex configurations. Knowing how to manipulate those anchor points, the things that help define the shape itself, is really essential. So to start with, I'm going to grab my rectangle tool. And remember that the rectangle tool shares a spot with a lot of other different tools, but we're going to start with rectangle. Whenever we're drawing something from scratch, we typically want to work with a stroke color, but no fill. And this is especially true if we're going to be tracing something. We want to be able to see the thing that we're tracing with and not obscure it with creating shapes that are already filled in. I'm going to use my Properties palette to change the fill by clicking on the Fill Color chip and selecting No Fill. And then just clicking off to the side dismisses that little control palette. And then I'm going to click and drag to create a rectangle. Once I have a shape created and I want to start to manipulate it, I can do that in one of two ways. If I have a shape or I've created a configuration and I want to change its size, then I use my Selection tool. And that allows me to simply reshape or resize something, but at the end of the day, it's still a rectangle. If I want to change something more dramatic about this rectangle, then I need to use my Direct Selection tool. It's the arrow tool directly underneath the Selection tool. And when I have my Direct Selection tool active, it allows me to click on the object that I want to edit, but also gain access to what are called anchor points. And it's the anchor points that really define any shape that you're creating from scratch in Illustrator. I'm going to click once on the path to activate the object, and notice that these little anchor points are unfilled. And then I can click on one, and if I move the cursor away, you can see that it's now filled. And that means that I can click and drag and reposition it and dramatically change the shape of that rectangle. Go to Command Z to undo. And I also want you to know that you can select more than one anchor point at a time. So I can click on one anchor point, it's filled in. I can hold my Shift key and click on a second one. And now that I have two anchor points active, I can click and drag on one and move them both at the same time. I'm going to Command Z to undo that. In addition to repositioning anchor points to change the configuration of a basic shape, I can also add additional anchor points. In order to add additional anchor points to a shape, the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure my shape is active. And you can do that by using either the Selection tool or the Direct Selection tool. And then I want to select my Add Anchor Point tool. It shares a spot with the Pen tool, the Add Anchor Point tool, and the Delete Anchor Point tool. So we're going to select the Add Anchor Point tool, and then we decide where we want to add it. We need to click directly on this line or path, and I'm going to click to add one in the exact middle of this line segment. Once I've added an additional point, I can use my Direct Selection tool to reposition it just like I can with any other point on an object. I'm going to Command Z to return that anchor point back to its original position. Sometimes what we want to do is we want to remove anchor points from an object. And to do that, we use the Delete Anchor Point tool. To use the Delete Anchor Point tool, make sure that your object is selected. Select the Delete Anchor Point tool, and then simply click directly on top of the point that you want to remove. That you know how to reposition anchor points, add and remove anchor points, you should be able to reproduce these simple logos that are part of this tutorial. And when you're reproducing these logos, don't worry about the typography that is part of these logos. Just worry about creating an accurate tracing of the logo shape itself. Good luck!